is martyreo. Martyr. You see, Jesus is telling us in this scripture, don't be afraid. In the scripture, it literally says, Jesus says, decide not to fear. Decide. You know how we like, our mothers and fathers when they're raising us, our uncles and grandmothers, whoever was the real comforting person, they tell you, well, don't be afraid. And it's not that you decided not to be afraid, but you were comforted into not being afraid. But that's not what Luke is telling us that Jesus said. Jesus is saying, decide not to be afraid. Makes me think of those sisters of the Catholic Church and fathers of the Catholic Church who, when our African brothers and sisters were going through their trials and tribulations to get rid of colonial powers and fighting amongst one another who was going to win, they were people of the cloth who were running hospitals and chapels. Many of them died. Some of them, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, had the ability to leave, but they stayed. They died because all they needed was the faith that they had from Jesus. So, standing firm and not a hair on your head being touched may not mean, as a human being, you're okay as a human being. It may mean that on this human journey, you may have to get real spiritual when you claim the Spirit. And that the hair that won't be touched is your spiritual hair. They say it's not the idea of dying, the act of dying, but it's the idea, the process. If you can decide not to be afraid, Jesus says you'll be all right. Now, in our country now, you know all the feelings that are swirling and swirling around. But some things don't have to change with the winds of politics. If God's peace, as we passed it in our congregation today, is in our hearts and guides our actions, we may have worldly losses, but if we are together, God, self, and others, those losses won't mean a whole lot. If we are witnesses, we may be able to be martyrs, if that be the case, knowing that God's world continues. God's people, humankind, continue with whatever troubles. We've gotten through it before. We'll get through it again. But guess what? Now we have the experience that, unlike 200 years ago, when black people rose up and were killed and hung and shot and all that stuff, people are talking about, well, they didn't convince enough of the black vote, because everybody knows that black people had the right to vote. Asians had the right to vote. Why, there's 3 new Asian people in the Congress. Oh, in other words, God's plan doesn't fit into political campaigns. But political campaigns, in fact, can be affected by God's plan. Somebody said the other day, it's not all gloom and doom because everybody knows what the deal is. There's no more pretenses about this policy means that. We know what it means. And so that arc of history that King talked about, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., bending towards justice, maybe that's what we're seeing. It didn't go whoop towards justice. It bent slowly towards justice. Underneath everything in Luke's scripture, he's telling his community, who are also being persecuted, like go out the door and you Romans can get you. The home of hope is in you. It is in you. You can imagine that each one of those folks represented a wider community. People from different backgrounds. Some of them from different religious backgrounds. And Luke is saying, with all that I've told you, don't worry. The hope that you want will come when your hope and my hope engage one another, and our hope engages somebody else's hope, and that great cloud of witnesses begins to grow, continues to grow. That's the message of the gospel. Not you got it all in the bag. By the way, I had a smile because the people who preach the prosperity gospel, believe in Jesus and you're going to get rich and stuff, I don't even have to fight those people anymore about that. But the people who talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ, that love is the way. As Hurricane Carter said, when he was not quite free, but had the hope in his heart because people he didn't know had read his book, believed in him. He said, he got me in this. Now we're going to bust me out. Well, I believe, brothers and sisters, that that's what Luke is saying. Love is the